Our last session before we break for lunch is 2019, which way will the elections go? I'm delighted to invite on stage Dr. Manisha Priyam, Mr. Rahul Verma, and Mr. Yogendra Yadav. To moderate the discussion, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Mukund Padmanabhan, editor, The Hindu.
Okay, welcome to the session 2019, which way will the elections go? As you know, this is a question that generates a whole lot of interest and seems to be one on everyone's lips nowadays. And I think one of the reasons for this is I suspect that at least at this particular point of time, it's open season. We can have at least one of four things that look possible at this juncture. First, an NDA government with Narendra Modi back as Prime Minister. Second, a Congress government supported by a mix of allies, both pre-poll and post-poll. Third, a third front government supported by the Congress. And finally, at the NDA coming back to power, but perhaps without Modi, and that we'll talk about that as well. But with a new Prime Minister, perhaps Mr. Gadkari or Rajnath Singh or someone else. And we'll get a sense from this very distinguished and eminent panel, Yogendra Yadav, Rahul Verma, and Manisha Priyam, which of the four outcomes are most likely as we go along, but we're not going to pin them down to definite numbers. But I wonder, rather than start with a general question, whether we can start with a state. Now, it's pretty clear that Uttar Pradesh will be the key, if not the actual determinant of the election outcome. In 2014, the BJP won 71, and that accounted for a little more than a quarter of the total seats it won on its own. And Apna Dal, of course, won another 2. If you take the 2017 Assembly election, map it on our in-house data team, mapped it onto the, a Lok Sabha, and it suggested that the BJP Apna Dal would get 30 seats, and the SP, BSP now with the RLD would get 49. Most people think, of course, that the NDA would do even much worse than this. So I wonder if I can start with you again. Is 30 possible, or is that going to be pretty difficult to get in India's largest, most populous state?
Mukund, allow me to begin with a clarification. In my previous life, I used to do this. In my current life, I don't. I'm a political activist. And I do not want to pretend to be a neutral neutral psephologist. I do hope political activists can be truthful, and that's what I'll try. Because being political activist doesn't mean lying. And using election forecast to peg your hopes is a very silly thing. So with this caveat, let me begin with UP. There are two effects at play here. One is simply the arithmetic. First thing that we need to remember is that 2014 was a complete outlier even for BJP successful elections. BJP succeeded in 91, it succeeded several times in UP. It used to get about 50 seats in an election where it did very well. 2014 was a complete outlier, so no one in BJP would believe that that kind of a thing is possible. Two things bring it down this time. Number one is just the coalition, SP-BSP coalition, which is the only coalition that matters. A lot of people think about whether why is Congress not in, etc. To my mind, that's irrelevant completely. SP-BSP coalition by itself, as your analysis shows, would bring it down by some 25-30 seats from where it was. 73 is what BJP had with their allies.
41 seats, yeah.
Yeah, so it brings them by 25-30 seats. Just the coalition effect with, assuming that BJP is as popular in UP as it was in 2014, still it'll come down by 25-30 seats. The second question is it a shade less popular? Now, everything that we know suggests that it is. If you go by the by-elections that have happened in Uttar Pradesh, the average swing away from BJP, strictly popularity swing away, is I think 8.7%. So if you combine the two and say, okay, there is a coalition against them and there is a swing of 9%, then the BJP comes down to 13 seats out of 73. That, of course, could again be an outlier completely. So you are looking at something in between, depending on whether you think the swing is 9% or 6% or 3%. So let's start the meter with something like 45 seats. And if BJP is at all a little more unpopular than it was, then it starts going below 45. To my mind, something like 23 seats for BJP. I mean, if it's 3% more unpopular, then it's about 35 seats. If it is 6% more unpopular, it's about 23, 24 seats. If it's 9% more unpopular, then it's about 10 to 12 seats. Take your pick.
Okay, I'm going to just feed off a couple of things you said. You know, take your point. I mean, but this mapping was done with 2017, and you talked about 2014 being an outlier. 2017 also would be quite an outlier, even though
that
it
was
3
also
years.
an outlier.
Yeah, exactly. And unlike other states where you've seen pretty big slippages, I mean, take Gujarat, for instance, 60.11 in 2014, down to 49 and something. It's a sort of 11 percentage point drop. In UP, they sort of more or less held firm. It was 42.63 for the BJP, down to 39 point something. So this was a slip, but not a slip by a lot. And you know, so given this, I want to ask a couple of questions. First is, do you think it was something of a mistake? I mean, Yogendra says that the SP and the BSP are the main factor, but do you think it was something of a mistake not to get the Congress on board for the anti-opposition, anti-BJP opposition? And also, secondly, wouldn't this cost in other states, the BSP not being present in places like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh? Manisha?
I'll just begin with the UP scenario. And assuming that I want to disagree with Professor Yadav, happens to be a guru, and assuming that 2014 was not an outlier, and the BJP won because it won, and if we look at the processes, if we look at citizen deliberations, and if we look at how and why it won, the best possible reasons, if I do studies of the small, the best possible reasons why it won in eastern UP was not ideological, but because it emerged as a political aggregator. Now, who was it a political aggregator of? The smaller parties that we think of, the Apna Dal, for example, Sonalal Patel's legacy, extremely important. The Rajbhars and the Gauds, who were in disagreement at that point of time with Ben Mayawati ji, all of it lapped up by the BJP. The Nishad party, that had never agreed with the politics of Adityanath in that area. The Nishad party, after the death of the father, Sanjay Nishad, brought on board by the BJP. And remember, the Ram Janam Bhoomi, even as it had a promise for upper caste majoritarian Hindus, it had a promise for the Nishads, who mythologically was said to be the Kevards, who took Raja Ram along the river Ganges. But they had been promised this time, that this time around, you will be given a scheduled tribe status, and many more such. So the politics of this region was a politics of subcategorization, which Nitish borrowed from down the Vindhyas, from Andhra Pradesh, and played it very well with the EBCs. So this script, written large, the politics of Purvanchal, as I would like to call, not just UP, was a politics of merger and alliances. Remember, a small player called Sudesh Mehto, the Ajsu, was supporting the BJP, and at that point of time, its opponents, the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha and the Jharkhand Vikas Morcha, were not together. So the tribals were disunited. The lower caste, the extremely backward caste, veering around, although not very certain, the 2014 elections that brought in to, the BJP to a clean sweep in Jharkhand. In the same year in December, the BJP was in the same area in Jharkhand testing troubled waters. So really, the certitude of that moment was not as much as the electoral battles were being fought. And after the electoral victory, we realized that the elections in Eastern UP and Western UP had been fought on two diametrically opposite principles. So as long as you can keep political boundaries sealed off from each other and social imaginaries of the voter can be directed towards vectors that are immediate in nature, you can have an outcome of the impossibles, which was what 2014 was. Now, if these are the premises on which I look at 2014, then what does 2017 hold in store, or 2019 hold in store for the BJP in Uttar Pradesh? Now, once again here you see that the Gors and the Rajbhar, for example, Om Prakash Rajbhar, not making it to national primetime news, but every time that the Ram Janam Bhoomi Mudda is asserted with certitude by Yogi Adityanath, Rajbhar says, "Acha, mandir wahi banayenge, to tarikh kab batlayenge? When will you tell us the date?" And he is not asking about the date for the making of the Ram temple there. He is asking about the date on which the Samajik Nyaya Samiti report will be tabled on the house of the UP Vidhan Sabha. So this certitude, not there. The Nishads, for example, absolutely militating. And a small player called Hardik Patel, unnoticed to the national media here, rallying around amongst the Kurmis. We will not even realize many of his colleagues, peers, unnoticed individuals are agents of change and will perhaps fight these elections as candidates of the SP. So my understanding is that the micro processes of change in Eastern UP are militating against the BJP. I haven't traveled to Western UP as of now, and certitudes of 2014 are not a past on the basis of which the outcomes of 2019 will be written. And I'll just add at the end here that even if certitudes will not be written, is there an emerging narrative? And my answer to that is yes. But I'll come back to the narrative in the future rounds. But the narrative is being set also. And the vector of that narrative, unfortunately, is not in line with the supply side dynamics of what you see as coming in from the central government.
Yeah, so I mean that point is well taken, that there are other things happening at the micro level that will have that could influence what happens in UP. You mentioned the by-elections as being, and you probably also think that the by-elections are a result of this. But these by-elections, Gorakhpur, Phulpur, Karana, were fought with SP candidates, RLD candidates. I think there was one by a Nishad party man also in UP. In this connection, Rahul, we hear a lot, and this often comes from the BJP, that yes, there will be vote transfers from the BSP to the SP, but this may not happen in the same way on the ground from the SP to the BSP. And none of these by-elections actually, even though they record significant slippages in votes, huge in fact, as you pointed out, they haven't yet demonstrated that transfer theory. So is that significant, or is this just BJP propaganda?
Okay, so a couple of quick points. One, so there is a fact that BJP is going to come down in UP, that's for sure. The debate is actually by how much. Will SP, BSP combined get 30 odd seats or 65, 66 odd seats? Yogendra wrote an article and the numbers range from 31 to 65. Now, on the 2 points of arithmetic and popularity, so right now when we are doing this math of like basically 2014 and 2017 was the lowest point for SP and BSP, if you combine those two numbers, they will get at least at minimum 35 odd seats. I think BSP may go further down. So the reason is like with every successive election, BSP's social base is unraveling. Every time they're coming down by 2 or 3 points. So it doesn't mean the math would add at the 2014 level. It can, like 2019 can throw a very different number. The second point on the popularity and the by-election. So for example, for sure, like if you have a combined might of the opposition, the ruling party is going to face challenges, right? Like, so in Kerala, you had the entire opposition, but what was the result? BJP got somewhere around 47%, and the whole alliance got 51%, right? So the vote share difference was just 4%. So what might happen that BJP may be able to retain a lot of votes, but might lose a lot of seats. The third point is, and Yogendra mentioned this in the context of Bihar, like if you look UP politics between 2002 and 2014, SP and BSP were the front-running parties, right? Like they were number 1 and 2, and BJP was number 3. What we are basically thinking in 2019 that party number 1 and 2 would come to defeat party number 3. Assuming that, and there is a caveat associated with the popularity thing, that BJP is basically losing 2, 3, 4, 5% votes. Now, there is a possibility that BJP will succeed in building a narrative that if we were doing so badly, if our government was very unpopular, why did they all need to come together to defeat us? So that way, the election in UP still remains open. BJP will come down, but by how much? Like,
Okay, open question. What about the Priyanka Gandhi factor? I mean, you know, which way will it cut? They got 7.5% the Congress in sort of 2014. There was one poll done by, I think, India TV or something, which showed that a significant surge in Congress votes after Priyanka Gandhi was made General Secretary of Eastern UP. Would that then be a factor that influences, tilts things away? They take some of the minority votes away and benefit the BJP in a way, unintentionally?
I speak off the cuff because I haven't actually visited those areas and have had a ground feel, which my other two colleagues have much better than I do. My own sense is that this won't make much of a difference. I think we tend to overrate these things. Every election, some personality thing happens just a few weeks before elections. And in the media, people make a lot of it because, I mean, it's newsy, it gives you nice photographs, there is some little clipping to go with it. But in the last instance, it amounts to very little.
She photographs well.
Sorry?
She photographs well, I said.
That's right. So in Uttar Pradesh, Congress would, if I'm a Congress voter, I would say, all right, I want to defeat the BJP. Congress is not really something which is going there. So a substantial portion of Congress's Muslim and Dalit votes will effectively have no option except to shift to SP-BSP. So and the trouble in our system is that unless you are seen to be viable, you don't even get your own votes. Congress could be at the receiving end of that logic this time.
Yeah. I suspect all of us, or all three of you, are in agreement that there will be slippages in the Hindi heartland. I mean, there's certain states that they actually maxed out, and they can only, the BJP can only go down from there. So in this connection, take the recent state assembly elections in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and look at the numbers. How much of a slippage, if any? I mean, are they relevant first to 2019? And do we get an overall sense of how much of a slippage there would be in 2019?
Two quick points. One is that, in a sense, Hindi belt is where this election will be decided. And I'm not one of those who believe that all elections are decided by Hindi belt or whatever. So none of those chauvinism. Sitting in Bangalore, I wouldn't say anything of that kind. All I wish to say is that in this particular election, if you focus on only these 226 seats of the Hindi heartland, which is where all the changes are likely to happen, in the remaining 325 odd seats, all the changes would broadly cancel each other out as far as the BJP is concerned. The real changes are, so in a sense, this is where we should keep our gaze on. BJP won, believe it or not, 191 out of 226 seats last time. So it has, and with their allies, they had 202 seats here. So they can only go down. How much can they go down? And do these 3 assembly elections give us any pointers? Historically, the evidence that we have seen shows that, because it is for the 3rd time that these 3 assembly elections are coming just 6 months before the parliamentary election, probably the 4th time. And the evidence shows that with one exception, that was 1999 Rajasthan. With one exception, every time the party that won the state assembly election in these 3 states, won the parliamentary election as well, and improved upon its performance. I guess that's the correct pattern. There's only one exception. So going by that, the BJP had won 62 out of the 65 seats in the 3 Hindi Heartland states, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh. Going by parliamentary election, going by state assembly election, the tally would drop to some 32 or something of that kind. So it would be halved. Previous assembly trend shows that it could go even further down because the party that wins tends to improve its performance in the parliamentary election. However, we should not take it for granted. Opinion poll evidence so far indicates that in Rajasthan in particular, there is a bounce back available to the BJP. I don't think there is much bounce back available in Chhattisgarh to the BJP. In Madhya Pradesh, broadly it seems Congress may improve its performance of Vidhan Sabha, but Rajasthan is where a very serious challenge for Congress lies because there is a possibility of reversal. This has happened earlier in Rajasthan. There is a possibility of reversal. Rahul's own popularity is pretty low in Rajasthan compared to Modi's. That's what the opinion poll indicators say. So that's where one would need to keep an eye, but by and large my sense is, and I've said it several times now, that in this Hindi belt of 226 seats, I cannot imagine how BJP would lose anything less than 100 seats. That's a straight loss of 100 seats. And the assumption for Uttar Pradesh is only 40 or 45, not more than that. So that's where the real battle is, and that's where this is the real Waterloo for BJP. 100 seats lost staring in its face in the 226 of all the make or mar Hindi belt.
Yeah. On this issue of is it, or whether this is, this whole story is not revealed before our eyes now. I mean, many of the alliances are securely soon up, but you mentioned Jharkhand, where the Congress has put together now what seems like a powerful combination, JMM, JVM, and RLD, but there's still some alliances still to be struck, and which could have a bearing. I mean, there's that strange and perpetually strange one between the BJP and the Sena, which each one wants to be the dominant partner. We don't know which way they'll go. Tamil Nadu, for instance, we're not sure how the ADMK is going to play it, and that might have a bearing on what happens. And also remains to be seen, even though they're committed to sharing to an alliance, how the Congress and the JDS fares in this state. So, Rahul, is it still a little early, or will we have a better idea a little later?
Of course, it's too early. But I would like to sort of comment on a couple of points and respond to your thing. So first, I think we don't have a good understanding what led to the 2014 verdict. One of the reasons we don't talk at all in the analysis is the turnout factor, right? So there is a good evidence that in 2014, where turnout increased, and that was in almost 70 odd seats, was by 15 percentage point, BJP's conversion rate of seats was 96%. And where there was no change, the conversion rate was 34, right? Even so that's why we need to link the turnout story to the by-election story and what might happen in 2019. So what happens in by-elections, the turnout is lower compared to general election. And the turnout among those sections are particularly lower, and Yogendra may correct me, those who would be considered traditional BJP voters. That's why we should not be reading too much into by-election results to sort of forecast UP. The second point, and I entirely agree with Yogendra on this point, is that this 2019 is sort of going to be this the focus should be on the Hindi belt, because in other places there would be slight gain and slight losses and it would cancel out. But now the question is whether these losses would be around 40, 50 seats or these would be 100 seats. I think Yogendra is calculating it another extreme where it may be 100 seats. For example, it is very much possible that in Rajasthan and in Madhya Pradesh, BJP does not lose a lot of seats, 1 or 2. Chhattisgarh, they may come down by 3 or 4. So it is very much possible that outside UP, BJP may lose 50 odd seats, or 20 odd seats. And this would be determined by, in next 3 months, how BJP is going to set the election narrative. And this is where we should be sort of like, every time you talk to anyone, what does 2019 look like? They will basically refer to a previous election. It may be in 1971, it may be 1989, it may be 2004, it won't be 2014, but some previous election. And in my opinion, 2019 may be an entirely different election, right? Where given there are a lot of differences in how, so why we keep talking about BJP every time? The reason, for all practical purposes, since 2014, we are in a BJP dominant party system. What does that mean? That the electoral competition is going to be shaped by how the game is played by BJP.
Yeah,
And that too will apply to alliance.
And this connection, the BJP, talks, or like to, from everything it says. I'll come back. Yeah, I'll ask the question. Maybe you can respond to that as well. Everything it says suggests that it would like 2019 to be a kind of presidential contest. And the suggestion is there's only one horse in this presidential race. It's Modi versus chaos, Modi versus grand adulteration. So is some of that going to play out and reflect in the election? Or is this going to be, as Ruchi Sharma said in his book, Democracy on the Road, is this going to be an election of many Indias? Manisha.
So, election of many Indias, I'd like to first disagree somewhat with Rahul, though only a modification, not a full disagreement. So what was this heavy turnout about? This heavy turnout was about Mr. Modi's 550 plus rallies. I happened to trail some of these. Let me quote and cite the rally in Gumla, a town which was reeling under a Maoist Bandh. The local hearts were closed. There was a rally at 3 o'clock. But by 2 p.m., enough people come out, and Mr. Modi comes and he makes a speech, and he says, Kisano hal uthao, yuva aap khoon ka rasta chodo, meaning thereby, imploring the farmers to come and pick up the plowshares and go to their fields, asking the youth to come and take the rasta of the kalam, the pen, and leave the banduk. So a general impression in the entire area that this would be a farmer-centric, a youth-centric government. One of his last rallies in Chhapra, which is a stronghold of Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav, 50 degrees Celsius temperature, amazing heat in the Heartland, in the Gangetic Plain. Now he comes around and talks about the electricity shortages, the students taking their exams, and the broken pathways with which jobs can be made possible. So these different compacts being made possible directly by Mr. Modi. So Mr. Modi himself fought these as a congeries of a myriad elections, and at the end of it, he was the unifying factor. Many other things that had happened against the UP at that point of time. Now the turnout is immense, and wherever there is an immense turnout, Rahul's theorem holds there. But look at the conditions. I mean, every law exists to be falsified. At least as a true LSE alma mater, I can say that there's no unconditional law on which human action will take place. And look at the grounds of Bihar. Now here, in that same place where Mr. Modi's party swept the elections, what happens that even before the election, one of the first alliances that is firmed up, the BJP decides to lower the number of seats it already has in the parliament. It wants to leave aside its own certitude of numbers, and it says, with the JDU, 50-50, 17 to them and 17 to us. Now, in this certitude, what happens? The JDU did not have so many seats in the parliament. Neither did it have so many seats in the parliament. The assembly elections, the JDU had fought with the RJD. So my last field visit, 2 weeks ago to Patna, the JDU's got the seats, but they are scrambling for the people they will put up as candidates, because last time their candidates who they think are possibly going to give the tickets did not even stand third in those elections. So yes, Rahul is correct. We should not take any past election as the script on which to write a new election. And Mr. Modi's party himself has demonstrated that it does not want to take the script either of 2014 or of 2015 on which it wants to write.
You're suggesting Modi himself wants to fight it as many Indias. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he fought 2014 as many Indias.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to this that those who understand that the certitude of the big is what drives the idea of India, after many years I see that both Nitish and Lalu Yadav who were student leaders from Patna University elections, but did not give a damn to the university after that. This time around, the first election that the JDU has fought seriously is the election for the Patna University Students' Union.
Yeah, just come to Bihar. I just want to persist with this question of presidential versus many Indias. She says, makes the interesting point that 2014, Modi sang different tunes in different places, and he's likely to do that in 2019 as well, which is, I think, interesting. What do you agree with that?
I think those 2 points are not contrary to each other. I think what's happening is Mr. Modi, as any astute political player would, the BJP knows that its success depends primarily on creating a national narrative, into turning it into one national election where you vote for parliament and you're looking at the PM. And within that, they would want to make it presidential. In that larger narrative, Mr. Modi, of course, knows where to pitch what kind of a regional color. And the point about social coalitions that Manisha made, that's critical, because BJP's success was stitching together a number of social coalitions last time. This time, the BJP's attempt is, of course, A, to make it national, B, to make it Modi versus Rahul, C, to keep the focus away from economy, and if possible, to keep the focus on the Mandir question. BJP knows that they have 3 structural advantages that BJP works with in this election. And these are 3 M's. Machine, and by machine I do not mean EVM, just the organizational machine. BJP has enormously powerful organizational machine, which Congress has no way of, practically no other party can match. Second, money, enormous money of the kind which is unimaginable. Someday some journalist will dig out what was the amount of tens of thousands of crores of rupees that was spent in this election. And third, I'm afraid I have to say here, the media. These are because media has been so partisan. So, this has been, and I'm sure you would agree with me, being not just in the media, but also an observer of the media. Last 2 or 3 years have been one of the darkest hours of Indian media, other than emergency. So BJP walks with these 3 structural advantages. They need to keep the narrative on the national, but unfortunately for the BJP and fortunately for India, that's the only political statement I've made.
Okay.
The focus is shifting to the economy. Yeah. I have, as I said right in the beginning, make no bones about the fact that I have a position. I would like Mr. Modi to lose. But in all fairness, I should say, Mr. Modi is not losing for the principal reasons why I would like him to lose. He would lose for secondary reasons, which is to do with economy, especially to do with farmers and unemployment. These issues are coming to the fore, and as they come to the fore, election is going to get more and more difficult for Mr. Modi.
Yeah. Okay, so you flagged the media and you flagged the issues, and I think we'll just deal with both of them before we wrap up. The media first. We've had at least 3 major polls done in recent months. We have the ABP News, which gives the NDA 233, the India Today poll, which gave them 237, and the channel, which shall not be named, gives them 252. So before asking whether any of these numbers make sense to you, the interesting thing is, go through the polls, and there is broad agreement in when it comes to some states and some areas. The BJP sweeps Delhi, it loses Punjab very badly, Mamata dominates in Bengal. The BJP improves in Orissa a bit, and there are some, there's great slippage in UP. But one of the points of noticeable disagreement in this poll is Maharashtra, which now is, contributes the 2nd largest number of states to the Lok Sabha. And I just want to ask you, what do you think will, happen in Maharashtra? And also, if you'd like to comment on it, do any of these numbers make sense to you, these channels? Or?
I think election forecast many months before, that's okay, gives us a good baseline to compare what is happening. but we really don't know what is going to happen in the polls, and the reason is very clear. So I worked at CSDS, like I know that data very well. We know, like for last three general election, there are at least 20 to 25% of Indian voters who make their mind whom to vote in the last 48 hours.
Really?
Like, yes.
20, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wonderful. So given, and this is what is happening, so why did polls did not able to figure out what is going to
Is
happen?
it just a post hoc justification of getting polls wrong, or
No.
because constantly getting them wrong?
See.
I mean,
All prediction by nature are going to be 50% right, 50% wrong. Now, if you are only in the business of making a forecast on the seat, that's a very different ball game. Like all kinds of like share market prediction, weather predictions, every predictions are likely to go wrong, right? But that's not where so I'm not in the I like to do that, but I want to sort of make much more serious points about how Indian voters behave. So given if you have 20-25% of voters who make their mind at the last minute, money, machine, leadership becomes very, very important because they can swing elections at the last moment, right? And this is what is, so what BJP has been successfully doing with Modi is getting late swings in all elections. So that's one thing. Second, on Maharashtra, if BJP and Shiv Sena contest together, I don't think there would be much change in terms of votes or seats because they were far ahead of Congress and CP alliance. So given the vote gap, I don't think there would be a closing in the sense that it will change the vote. Third, there was something Yogendra was mentioning, which
well, we go to issues later.
But, so yeah. Issues on that, and this is important, right? So I think there are issues which are there in our society. We all feel it. We know there is agrarian distress. We know there is economic anxiety. People are worried about jobs. But does that translate into votes? And does that matter in how people make voting choices? Are entirely two different analytical questions. So even in the case of Madhya Pradesh, and so I'll talk just about Madhya Pradesh. We know there is farmers' distress, agrarian crisis. But in your own newspaper, Srinivasan Ramani and Vignesh both did the analysis, and what they found that BJP lost or did badly in the election.
You're talking about the recent round of elections. Yeah, that's true. But take Gujarat. Gujarat was a story of two elections.
Gujarat for always, not just 2017. In 2012, in 2007, there has been an urban-rural divide. And the reason are very simple. Gujarat has 45 to 50% of urban population. Madhya Pradesh has 10 or 12% of urban population.
Okay.
Given the demographics are very, very different, game is going to be very, very different. So these issues are important. Whether Congress or the opposition parties will be able to mobilize voters on them. Are they credible enough voice that voters are going to listen to them and vote accordingly? That's a very different question. And we don't have a good evidence which shows that economic anxiety is going to go against BJP at the moment.
Yeah, so Manisha, I want to turn to you. I mean, this point is that, yes, there are real economic issues, but I think this is a telling on the Indian electorate, but, they may not actually influence electoral outcomes as much as we think they do. I think the two issues you mentioned in the polls, unemployment, which now we know is, thanks to the NSSO, is, at a sort of record high, and agrarian distress too is a real problem. They're all flagged. But is it also true that, people sometimes flag issues, at least when polls are done? For instance, Mehengai is something that is always there, either number 1, number 2, or number 3. And this is at a time when inflation is, not exactly raging. So how much do these issues actually play a role in elections? This is, to sort of respond to Rahul. And what issues, if any, real issues will play a role?
So, a huge surprise, by about 2000, Professor Yadav was calling it a deepening of the democratic upsurge and a participation of the marginal and the unexpected happening, democracy thriving in conditions of extreme poverty, illiteracy. So this was an exceptional turn in Indian democracy. as also democracy globally. But why was it happening? And the reason really is, surprise, surprise, the poor, the weak, the unequal, the marginal happen to deliberate on issues. Now, they happen to deliberate on issues. Another surprise, economic issues matter. For example, the issue of inflation played very heavy on the minds of the Bihari electorate in the 2014 elections. Now, much before the elections were happening, there were voters telling me in Gaya that the prices of vegetables are so high that this time around, in the month of Kartik, the festival of Chhat, which was about 6 to 8 months away at that point of time, they said, we may not be able to buy a hauda of plantain, the banana which is traditionally offered to the gods. So how it will turn into the narrative, that is maybe different, but economic issues matter. So this time around, then the question may be asked as to what are the issues. Now, among the issues that are very important, now to say unemployment, yes, unemployment means a formal thing in the labor market, but what are people militating against? People are militating against an array of things that means unemployment. Now, what does that array of things means for the student studying in Allahabad University, for the student studying in the BHU, for the student studying in Patna University? It means the breaking of the pathways to social mobility. Simply no jobs. So one of those things that once again does not make the headlines, but the moment we go to these smaller universities for smaller talks with students, the moment we walk out of the halls, students come out to tell us that the post-metric scholarship for scheduled caste students has not been paid for over 3 years now. So many students from these areas who were studying there or studying with the support of these scholarships in other states, studying for engineering, a lot of them have had to come back. So this is really like a tinderbox, and in many sort of ways, students are either simply beaten brutally by the police, or students in BHU, for example, when students agitated against the molestation of a young girl, the outcome was 10 students are not being allowed to take the MA exams. So the broken pathways to come into the job market is an important fact. The other part is obviously demonetization. Once the entire cycle, when demonetization happened, perhaps that was a high moment, people were in queues, etc. But the broken pathways now, when jobs are not available. So come around to Delhi and you will find that in the labor market for the informal sector, the daily wage laborer stands till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and Tariq Tachil and others from Yale who study the labor market and the informality and the ways in which these pathways have broken out, you will find that till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, the labor does not find a daily wage to do this. So in many sort of ways, unemployment is high on the agenda. Surprise, surprise, that same media that we blame, the number of times the fact is played out on that media that the NSS report on unemployment has not been allowed to become public by the state. The misuse of that media may be correct, but the number of times that this news runs, there is news enough on the ground to say that there was some ghotala happening in the job market, and that may be responsible for our condition today. So pathways of mobility from C-grade cities to the metros, broken in very different sort of ways, pathways to mobility. Remember the Bihar labor compared the Bihar-Gaya situation with Surat and Pune when they acted in 2014. Now those mobilities, if you remember, 2 days before the Sardar Patel statue was to be erected, there was a specific riot happening, pushing back the labor from them. And the administration in Gujarat was holding them back, saying, complete the statue, it has to be inaugurated by the Prime Minister. Who were the welders? Who were the electricians? All of them had to be given the protection of the state to be able to stay back. So many riot-type situations amongst labor that goes for mobility on construction and manufacturing sites. The students who are looking for pathways, those broken in very serious sort of ways. The economy does matter. The economy matters in very important and significant ways. While unemployment will be a big issue, it will happen in different sort of ways. The other and the last point that I would want to make here, that what has been offered in place of unemployment is actually a reformulated politics of the dominant, which is the EWS. Now the EWS quota is being seen as an assertion by the dominant saying, oh, now not backwards are not the only one who will get jobs, even we will get jobs. Now the last thing that I heard before I came to this room was that Nitish has had to formulate a Mukhyamantri Atyant Pichda Varg Protsahan Yojana, Now, what is this Protsahan about? He is saying that if you compete in the prelims of the civil services, I will give you a financial support of 1 lakh rupees. If you compete in the prelims for the Bihar Public State Service Commission, I will give you a financial Protsahan of 50,000 rupees. So one-time cash transfers will not work. Very serious questions are being asked on job, and the leaders are acting only on the supply side with too little and too late.
Yeah, Yogen, briefly before we turn it to the audience for...
2 points. One is technical narrow, the other is larger. The technical narrow point is this, that pollsters are likely to make a mistake. And this is not because of political prejudice, not because of the midnight phone calls that do happen. But apart from that, there's a technical reason, and the technical reason is this. Pranay Roy calls it type 1 error, type 2 error. Pollsters like to play it safe. This is type 1 error. I may not get the outlier result, but as long as I get the direction right and I'm playing it safe, it's okay. Type 2 error is when you take risk, make a big forecast, and get it completely wrong. This is a nightmare of pollsters. They never want it. Now, in a special situation, the tendency to make a type 1 error can lead you to a type 2 error. This is exactly what happened in 2004. And this is likely to happen in 2019. And the reason is this. In 2004, if you remember, all the opinion polls average was 271 seats for NDA. Exit poll average was 255 seats for NDA. The actual was 187 seats. And the reason is that all the errors were stacked in one direction. Again, because this is going to happen in North India, Hindu Heartland, there is a serious possibility with the best meaning pollsters, and I believe most of the mainstream pollsters are doing it correctly. They want to get it right. On that assumption, I think that this technical error might mean that the final forecast that you see on the exit poll day would overestimate BJP by anything like 30 to 50 seats. That's a technical point. Political point, I think it all depends. And Rahul is right, and I think Manisha, the kind of things that she's drawing our attention to, we must keep an eye on these things. Unfortunately, sitting away, we tend to take a very macro view of politics, things that would matter. Above all, does the opposition come out with an alternative agenda? So far, what we have heard from opposition is alliance arithmetic and very little else. Do they have an alternative? Is there a hope? And second thing that can make a difference, I'm assuming that all the things Rahul said will make a difference. BJP will have an edge till the last day. BJP will have a machine edge, organizational edge, last minute swing. All that will happen for BJP. But one more thing that can make a difference is one more front page story by Ann Ram in the Hindu.
Okay. On that note, questions. Yeah, okay, gentlemen over there. We need to be brief. We don't have much time. I have just told time's up.
Less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
How important are candidates in this election? Indira Gandhi has famously said, if I give a ticket to a lamppost, it would win. Are we back in that situation, or how much of consideration do voters give to a candidate?
Yeah. Okay, got it. Rahul, can you take that briefly?
We should collect all the questions.
Okay, just that one question. Yeah, you, sir. Just brief in front. Please be brief. Yeah, you got a mic.
Yeah, I want you to speculate just very briefly on what happens after the elections, assuming from what Yogendra said, and there's general consensus, that the BJP may lose 50 to 100 seats, right? Will the current opposition be able to cobble together a government, given their disparate interests and contradictory interests, that would last
in a hung
the
parliament.
full 5 years? Or would it really be a prelude to the BJP coming back?
Okay, one more question. Lady there. Yeah. Tara.
So we've talked about unemployment and lack of jobs being a big issue, potentially a very big issue in this election. The lack of jobs actually affects women much more than it affects men, because they tend to lose more jobs in a jobless situation. affects the whole family. But I noticed that polls and pollsters don't look at the gender angle when polling. They look at a caste angle, they look at a religious angle. So if you read CSDS documents, for example, for 30 years, you don't see that question being asked at all. Are women going to vote a certain way because joblessness actually affects them much more?
Okay. One last question there, lady in the red. Just 1 second. Sorry? Yeah, we haven't mentioned the Northeast. Correct, yeah.
We discussed, how the
We haven't
BJP
mentioned
won,
many things. We haven't mentioned the South. We just ran out of time, yeah? Okay.
how the BJP won, 190 seats plus in the Hindi Heartland last time, and that it's going to drop this time, but we're avoiding the elephant in the room. Why?
So can you hold that closer?
So the BJP won more than 190 seats in the Hindi Heartland last time around, and how that's going to drop. But I would like Professor Yadav to address the elephant in the room, which is why.
Jharkhand, is that? No.
Why is
Hindi Heartland.
So
Yeah, so you go with the question
on
of...
the question, absolutely correct point. Unemployment hurts women more, but CSDS. So what happens on TV, I'm not responsible for that because TV has its own thing. But at least in the print and in serious research, gender is always an angle which most pollsters like to do. CSDS, every election has done that. And Rajeshwari Deshpande, professor at University of Pune, has been writing about women vote and how they vote. We know that BJP faces a gender disadvantage, so less women are likely to vote for BJP. In 2014, that gap narrowed. What will happen in 2019, we don't know. So serious pollsters, researchers do look at that. On the question of what will happen post-2019, that's like in the realm of super hypothetical. I don't know like how it will shape up. Candidates, they matter, but it depends on the context, right? So if the election becomes national or say if a state election, like if local issues are going to dominate, then candidate choice would become important, right? But if election is sort of like on a national narrative, doesn't matter who the candidate is, candidates won't matter. So it depends what the context is. In 2014, who was BJP candidate in, say, Barabanki didn't matter, right? But in 2019, it may matter. So it depends on the narrative and agenda setting.
You want to respond to any other question? Have we missed one question? Have we? Yeah.
Two things. One is why is BJP likely to lose in the Hindi belt? For one simple reason. BJP won not only because of the communal issue, it won primarily because it generated a hope about a better future. Forget Achhe Din and so on, that's a bit of sloganeering, but there was a genuine hope that it invited. That hope is more or less extinguished, which is not to say that someone else has been able to generate a hope, and that's where the gap lies. So it's essentially because of economic performance. I really wish people were unhappy with the BJP because of what it has done to Indian democracy and Indian secularism. My fear is that that is not the dominant reason why BJP would lose, but it's on the question of agrarian distress, unemployment, and in general, the economy. I mean, to my mind, it is for the first time in the history of India that we may see a general parliamentary election taking place on the question of rural agrarian issues and to do with things like unemployment. The real issues are coming to the fore, and that's a great thing. Finally, your question about what after 2019, and that really worries me. As I said, I want Mr. Modi to lose. I do think he's going to lose, but I don't know what would happen thereafter, and I really, really worry. My introduction to electoral politics was 1977. I cannot forget that day when Indira Gandhi lost and the jubilation. I was very young, but I remember it vividly. But I also remember 1979 very vividly, 1980 very vividly. And is there a possibility of that being replayed? That unless the opposition to BJP can step beyond simple anti-Modism, can offer an alternative agenda and then implement it to some extent, there is a real serious danger because, as I said, on the issues of democracy and secularism, there is a very long battle remaining to be fought. just 15 seconds for advertisement. Those of you looking for a real agenda of this election can look at this manifesto that some of us have released. This is not my party manifesto.
Okay.
It's a document called Reclaiming the Republic, which has been released 5 days ago by intellectuals, activists, by committee headed by Justice Shah, which actually spells out what the manifesto should be like if we are serious about the real issues. And to my mind, that long-term future depends on whether we are serious about these issues and whether something is done to implement it once Mr. Modi loses this election.
Okay, on that worried and concerned note, I think we should wrap up and head out for a good lunch. You can please give them a big hand, all three of them. And you can speak to them during lunch. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I request Mr. Padmanabhan to please present mementos to the speakers on stage? We will have a 15-minute lunch break. Please ensure you're in time for the next session, which is the new face of women in Indian cinema. Thank you and enjoy lunch.